Hey friends, welcome back to the Phoenix tutorial, and we are on the shaping portion. So we fully collapsed the model over here, you can see, and here I have the finished of the first version. Obviously, this one's going to look a little bit different than this one because of the structure changes that I mentioned before, but it's relatively gonna be kind of the same. So what are things you need to know before we start this tutorial? First off, we are going to be shaping it with methyl cellulose. So if you don't know what that is, go check out my paper videos. I'm going to have that linked. And that's going to describe what methyl cellulose is, how to mix it, and whatnot. And then if you kind of know what it is, you can see some of my other shaping tutorials just to kind of understand how I use it. But for the most part, you know, we're just going to go for it. I'm expecting you to know at least what MSC is to get it and how to use it a little bit. Now, if you don't have methyl cellulose, you can use carboxyl methyl cellulose, CMC. It's very accessible internationally and very cheap. So there's a high chance your country has it wherever you live. So find that. And if you don't have that, you can just use regular school glue and mix it with a little bit of water. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it'll still work. But most likely, if you have access to white glue, your country probably also has CMC. So yeah, get that ready. I've got my methyl cellulose over here, and this is, you know, this is kind of the consistency. So it's a little bit thicker than sometimes what I would make paper with, and that's just going to help us to wet fold the double tissue without it kind of disintegrating on us. You don't want it to be too watery. Yeah, with that, let's get started. Now, I know I just talked a lot about using methyl cellulose, but the first thing we're going to do is finish up the shaping, the dry shaping. So stuff that we don't need methyl cellulose for, such as the tail and, you know, eventually some of the feathers, just all the creases we can do, and then the wings. And then once those are done, then we can start to wet fold everything into place. But let's start with this section. So this is like the tail feathers. That's not exactly the tail. And this is pretty easy. What we're going to do, I'm going to start with this side, is just fold an angle bisector like this. Now we're going to unfold it. That's just kind of our reference, because we are going to be shifting the feathers like this. So you're kind of crimping them to the side. And I know there's a lot of layers here, but you know, something small. It doesn't really have to be anything. You just need to make sure there's some gap. And then when you refold that bisector, it might cross a little bit here, which is totally fine. And then basically you would fold the next layer as a bisector over the top of it, just like that. And we have quite a few of those feathers, so you're going to keep doing that with all of them. Now, there's no exact like reference on how much you should be crimping. This is kind of up to you, but you can try to copy my spacing by just watching how I'm folding these. And you kind of just want like an even spread of them all. Like there's one like this. And now this isn't really a full bisector. I'm just leaving some space. I kind of like the look of the layers kind of going over top of each other. So we're going to stick with that as it spreads out. So I think it makes a nice little shape. And then I think we have one more feather out here like this. So you can pull that one out just like that. And then same thing. Use the layers. Just fold them over on top of each other. Like this. Now, this very last one, I kind of like to keep it wide. So I don't know if you can see on this one. It stays wide. So we're going to keep it wide like that. Should be fine. And we're not folding on the backside because the backside gives us some width. So it's just like this. So let's quickly do that on the other side. Yeah, it's this is a pretty easy kind of step, but it's still part of the shaping, I consider. That. And the nice thing about the other side is all you're really trying to do is match the first side you did. But even by doing this, you can change it however you like. You know, maybe if your phoenix is in a different pose, then it's going to change how these are kind of spread out. Oh, probably not much, but you know, maybe they're just angled a certain way. You know, feel free to get creative with this. I'm just going to kind of show you what I would do, which in this case is very simple. All right, we got one more of these flaps right here. This one's going to stick out wider like this. Like that. And there you have it. We have the start of our shaping. So that's going to cover that. You can kind of see how that will work. And that will let these feathers, you know, do that sort of thing. Which that's actually like the next thing we're going to work on. So I'm going to flip it upside down like this. And we're going to take a look at the finished phoenix. So just pay attention to the texture on these layers. It's actually very similar to what we did for these ones, but much longer and thinner. So all we're really trying to do is get texture. And I think because of how these tails are stacked up, it's most likely that, you know, this tail will probably be facing that way and the back tail will be facing left, kind of like that. The back tail has a lot less layers to use. So just keep that in mind, but you can see I'm kind of facing the layers inwards to each other. So for this one, it's going to face inwards. And what I'm going to do basically is see how long this goes. And if you remember, we did all these stretches. So that's why it's able to go so long like this. Kind of create like start of something like that. Crease accordingly. And then we can overlap the next one. And the next one is going to overlap, and I'm just going to leave some room like that. Again, we're just trying to create textures here, pretty much. And then we have a few more layers here, so I'm going to do another one. And this one I'm not really going to worry about it going to the edge. I'm just trying to create this like fan type thing. And then in the back we don't have as much room left. But I don't know if you can notice. Basically our tail, it gets thinner and then a little bit wider and then back to thin. So at this point, instead of folding more layers this way, I'm just going to fold it back and behind from this corner down. So there's not really a reference point. I'm just kind of spotting it out. And if I showed it back, this is like all just done by valley folding. There you go. And then something similar. So now on this side, instead of valley folding, right, in order to thin this a little bit, we can kind of just do some crimps. So let me grab some of these layers, and I'm going to do a mountain fold from this point down to about where those other layers are. So I'll Gonna make a mountain fold like this. From this point and just somewhere down below here. It doesn't really matter where. You just kind of pay attention to the angle. The reason it doesn't matter is because it all gets hidden up in this edge here. And it can technically swivel. So you can technically do like a little swivel fold here or something like that. But again, it's not super important. We're just kind of grabbing the shape of our tail. Like this. And we're going to do something similar with the other layers in the back too. Now I know there's a lot of layers. So honestly, if your paper is just getting kind of crazy, you can just move them all over to the side. So I think something you can do is just kind of push them into the middle like this. Something like that, but that's just, so the important thing is we have the start of the shape of a tail happening right here. With a bunch of layers. And actually, you know, even everything I did right here, it might be subject to change later. I might even just actually fold this in half and do something, but we're really just going to have to see later on how it looks. But that's kind of the concept. So at least now that you have these flaps in the way, they're kind of set up for us to work on later. And just do something similar on the back tail. So again, I'm just going to take this outer edge, fold it in. As a really long flap. Same thing with the next one. And as you can see, we only have like these two layers to work with on this side. And then we have two on the other side, but I can use the other one as the backing like this. So it doesn't really lay flat from the other side, but it's just kind of like that. And that's going to be used as our other tail. And actually the shape that I'm going for might be a lot easier to see from this other side, just because there's less layers. So for here, I'm actually just folding this layer behind, and I'm gonna fold it back on itself to get the shape I want, just like this. And then now we just have all this to resolve. So just keep that valley fold going all the way till where the tail kind of stops right here. And it probably won't lay flat, but we're just more concerned about this section right here, like that. Right, so eventually we're going to try to turn the thicker tail into looking something more like this shape. But I think we're going to wait to wet shape it or wet fold it, because it's going to be a lot easier when it's wet for it to actually stay, since there's so many layers here. So I guess don't worry about that too much now. As long as you have this, it'll be fine. And we'll turn it into something like that later. All right, the next thing we're going to do is on the chest feathers. And I think what I'm going to do is a little bit different than what I actually did here. But the effect is probably going to be the same. So let's start on this lower one. We have two levels, right? Like that. So on this lower one, what I want you to think about is folding an angle bisector like this. And you can kind of just pre-crease this for now. And I'm folding through just the top 2 layers like that. So I'm folding through these 2 layers, just like that. And now I'm going to unfold it. And because if we examine our tip, we have another point sticking out here, right? Just like that. What I want to actually do is swivel that point outwards a little bit. So I'm just going to push it so that maybe this edge points perpendicular or points down. And I'm going to start to crease that. And as I crease that, I'm going to put back in this angle bisector like that. And as you can see, it's also starting to pull along that next one. And it won't really bisect the next one, but it's kind of like a little swivel fold that'll kind of lock itself, or not really lock itself, but resolve itself like this. And that way we can have our 2 feathers like that. Looks something like this. So let's do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to pre-crease, angle bisector, kind of. Or it's less of a bisector, it's more from this point to the top point. I guess that wouldn't be a bisector. Like that. Unfold it. I'm going to find the second point right here. And I'm going to pull it out a little bit. Right, and let it kind of angle. So pushing up on these layers here to get it to the right angle. So that way when I kind of push down on it like that, it forms that crease like a crimp. And then at the same time, I'm going to start to close this fold we did. And it's going to swivel the next one back into place. Like this. There you go. So that kind of looks like feathers, right? And we're going to do the same thing on the layer on top of this. And this time though, the valley fold we're doing, I won't call it a bisector anymore. It's from this point to the corner. So like this. Like that. Right, and then same thing, unfold it, find the point on the inside. Kind of crimp it outwards like this. Like that. Press down on it to crease. And then refold that pre-crease we did as a swivel on the other feather. Like that. And then we do it one more time on the other side. So valley fold from this corner to that corner. Unfold. Crimp the point outwards a little bit. And then fold that pre-crease we made as a swivel to get the feather. Like that. So now we have our layer of chest feathers. Kind of cool, right? Now, what you might be thinking from this point is, okay, we have texture here and we have texture at the bottom, but this is kind of awkward when it's just blank space here. But we are going to resolve that. So I just want to show you on this one, you can see that the layers are valley folded to the inside in order to cover up that texture. And so where are those layers from? So those layers are from here, which is the valley folds we did for this tail section. And basically what you do is you take it from the tail section and it's going to open up part way between here. But you just also want to valley fold it into place. And then the others are going to intercept from the top side here. So kind of swivels from the bottom. It doesn't have to really go anywhere. It's just so that I can lay flat. But we're getting a bunch of layers like that started to fold in. And then you can see that I start to put them at angles. So they don't all go to the center. They kind of angle outwards. And that gives that texture. So for the next one, I'm going to valley fold it like this. And just kind of get an angle like that. And then if it gets caught over here, you just want to kind of shimmy the layers around until it resolves. Like that. And we're going to do that for as many layers as we can, kind of. The layers in the back here get kind of stuck. But as we do this, we're also just kind of thinning out the tail. So get a few of those layers as you can. There's a lot, so you probably don't need all of them. I might just do 4 for now. And then move along to the other side. Right, and then that's going to make it so there's texture going down the tail. So let's do the same thing on the other side really quickly. I'm going to start by valley folding this one pretty far in. It's like this. And let's get 3 more. Like that. And yeah, there's not really much references at this point. You're kind of organically shaping it, but I think that's going to help with this. And if you don't like this kind of style, you can probably just mirror everything on both sides and make it look really exact and stuff. But for me, I'm just trying to use texture to get it to, you know, look how I want it to. We can get 1 more in there. This will be a small one. That. There you go. And you can see that even though they're not fully flat, right, it creates some shadow, and that's the shape. It's shaping itself, right, into how we want to approach it. And now using that as curves, the rest of the layers, right, what I'm going to do is put a small mountain fold tracing that edge. And so that's going to thin the rest of the body out a little bit. Like this. I'm kind of just pushing all these layers over like that. And it's not really going to fall flat because there's a lot of layers, but it's going to thin this side out and really make that start to curve. And this will be really put into place once we actually wet fold it. It's kind of just getting these layers out of the way. So kind of getting a little curve into these layers. So if I look at it from the underside, right, you can see it's right now it's just kind of small. But I'm giving direction to where these layers should go. And it is pretty thick, so got to be kind of strong. I know it's kind of hard to see because everything's in the way, but right, it's just simple folds, you know, like this to thin it out, basically. Now from the other side, looks like that. Right. And so that gives us space for where our legs are going to go later, like that. But yeah, so that's kind of the body. And we'll leave it here for now, and we're going to be wet folding it later. All right, so the next thing we're going to be working on is the legs. And we're going to just do part of the legs at the moment. Obviously, things are all in the open, so we'll have to come back to them later. But essentially what we want to do is kind of make them look like chicken legs. So if you don't know what those look like, just Google a chicken. But essentially it starts off kind of like round and thicker, and then it thins out into a leg. So you can kind of see if I pinch here, this is the very basic shape. However, we don't want to just do this. We want to actually like make it round. And then later on, we're going to pose the leg. And if you look at a chicken leg, there's some hinges depending on where it is. So you can either do 2 joints, which isn't really like a chicken, but other birds might have 2 joints or something like that. But essentially, you just kind of want to block in with like a rabbit ear that isn't fully collapsed, and then the extra part of that rabbit ear you can kind of crease in for now, just to kind of set that in place, because that's going to be used as, you know, our leg for shaping later. And then from here, you don't really have to do a whole lot, but just kind of have the layer so that all the toes are collapsed. And then we're going to block out our claws. So what I like to do is this outermost claw is going to kind of be just, you know, the claw on the side. And then we need one sticking out in the back. So the back claw right here will be the one in the back. So it's honestly pretty straightforward, but you just want to fold that one down and then fan out the others. And some of your layers might get a little bit loose, but because this is folded in half, it kind of helps to, you know, stretch out some of the layers a little bit, kind of like this, just to kind of visualize where the claws will be. Obviously, we're going to make them nice and sharp later. And then once you have that in place, I like to do a valley fold upwards, and this really just kind of helps set where eventually it will be, because we want to pose it kind of aggressively, like it's attacking. And do the same thing on the other side. So if I show you the other phoenix, you can see what the final leg shaping will kind of be looking like. So you see how we start off with like a thicker joint, and then it thins out, and then we have these sharp claws. So that's what we're going to be doing later once we wet fold. But for now, we just want to, you know, sketch it out basically. So basically on the same thing on the other side, right? You can treat it like a rabbit ear, like this. You don't have to fold perfectly in half through the claws, because it'll change once you adjust it, and then kind of get that thicker portion shaped out a little bit. And then we're going to block in our claws. So once again, the back one, we're going to fold it down like this, and then fan out the ones on top like this. Just pull them out a little bit. And then once they are pulled out, I'm going to do like a little valley fold upwards, kind of keep them in place like that. And actually you can see this one was a lot cleaner than the other one, but again, doesn't really matter. We're going to fix it up later. And that's just our basic shaping. So next thing we can do is start on the wings. And actually you can see mine already started to fold right here, but we want to fold our wings in the correct orientation outwards. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to count some grid points. So if you look at our wing, we have 4 grid units between where the leg is and where the hinge of the wing is, like this, right? So the 4 that I'm counting is 1, 2, 3, 4. The center 2, there's going to be this valley fold that you see here. And the direction this valley fold is it's facing the back of the phoenix. So your wings might be kind of overlapped like this for now. You want to trace up and find those 2 units and make a valley fold like you saw on mine right there. And that is going to allow the wing to fold out to the side like this. And this is to correct orientation because of where the pleats are. And we're going to use those pleats to turn them into feathers, 2 layers of feathers like you see on the phoenix here. So let's do the same thing on the other wing. So we're going to look at the back. We're going to find the grid units, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on the middle 2 is the one we're creating that valley fold on, from corner to corner. It's going to valley fold outwards, like this. And see, now we're getting that really big wingspan that we want for our phoenix. And if we hold it together, it kind of looks like this. Now that the wings are out of the way, we can kind of block in the head. So right now all the feathers, right, are kind of jumbled in each other. Eventually they're going to be all sticking out backwards like this. Now there's a lot of them, so they might be getting in the way of each other, but we're going to shape them out later. I'm just going to grab all of them like this for now so I can show you where our head is going to be. And then our head and our face will be right around here. This is going to be our beak. And then these are extra little feathers. And the way it works is the beak is actually pretty close to the chin. We basically create the neck by thinning out this area and just creating the beak. And we're going to do also some little pleats to get the eyes. But I find it easier to do that at the end because oftentimes while you're working on everything else, you accidentally mess up the face. So we're going to leave the face for later. I just want to show you that that's where it's going to be and kind of how to hold the paper or get the paper ready. Because when we hold our feathers here, basically it thins out like this, right? And you can already kind of start to see how it tilts the head forward at an angle, and then that's where our beak's going to be and everything else. Now, one thing we can do on the head, we can work on these feathers a little bit. And this is, again, before the wings and before wet folding. But you'll notice the head feathers, they're pretty simple. You're just creating a feather at the end of the flap right here. Right? And so I'll show you how to do that really quickly. Now, I'm going to take the outermost feather, which is this one in the corner. And, right, we have 3 on this side and 3 on the other side, or 3 or 4, I think 3. But you're basically going to make mountain folds facing outwards. So the ones on this side, I'm going to mountain fold here. On the other side, I'm going to mountain fold respectively. And it's pretty simple. Actually, it's very similar to what we did with the legs, but opposite is we're just going to fold these in half like this all the way until the tip. So there's like a half grid unit right there where you can kind of just eyeball about this much. And then you're going to make that mark right there while trying to mountain fold the rest of that flap like this. So you get something like that. And then for now, you can just give it a little bit of a curve. It probably won't stay until later. You're going to do that on every single feather. So I'll show one more. It's pretty easy. I'm just folding it in half like this, all the way until the end, about the same length. Get mountain fold into that feather. And we get that nice effect of a little head feather. So I kind of like this shape. You can clean it up, right? Like this layer isn't fully clean, but you know, you try and then make them kind of thin. And later on, again, when we wet fold them, the curves will stay and the paper will stay in place. So go ahead and do that on all the feathers, and then we're going to come back and start working on the wings. All right, so let's get started on shaping the wings. Now, I'm going to preface this. The shaping is a little bit organic in terms of the folds we're going to be doing. And I learned this shaping technique from Paper Forger, whose Instagram I'll link down below. So definitely check his stuff out. It's really, really cool. It's not the exact same wing structure, but yeah, check it out. Yeah, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of change this pleat. So we have this pleat that runs through the whole model, and we're going to alter it a little bit. Now, something you'll notice with, say, this phoenix is you can see the presence of that wing through part of the feathers, but not on this last one right here. And kind of right there. So basically we're going to modify it so it terminates and it makes this section a little bit longer. So what does that exactly mean? Well, we are going to kind of unfold this pleat. Not all the way, but we're going to change how it works a little bit. So instead of it folding along the full pleat, we're going to shorten it from this edge and kind of try to make like a curve that goes around. Now, one thing I'm going to do here is on the very edge one. So we have a valley and then a mountain like this. On the mountain, actually, I'm going to go, let's see, a couple in. So valley, mountain, valley, mountain. So see, we have valley, mountain, valley, mountain. This is where I'm going to have the pleats terminate. So first I'm going to fold these pleats together like this. And then right here is where this pleat is going to have its new starting point. And you can see that now underneath, it's not really on the grid line. And I'm going to have to adjust it for the subsequent creases as well. And as I'm adjusting it, the other thing I'm doing is going to have to reclose these pleats. So they're going to be like new mountains and valleys that form to accommodate this change. And it's not going to lay perfectly flat, but that's kind of okay. We're just going to deal with it for now as we go into the wing. So you can see how it's like billowing a little bit this way. Just don't worry about that for now. And as it gets closer in, it's going to be more like what it was before. Until like around here. And I think this is kind of okay at this point. Now to resolve this part up here, you can kind of think of it like an Elias stretch a little bit, but you're going to grab the layers together, which are now kind of shifted, and you're just going to allow it to kind of pull until this part stretches out. And it's going to change some of the pleats now along this direction. And yeah, you're just going to let that happen. It's going to kind of be organic. But try to get it so that it's stretching. And what you'll slightly notice is that now we have an unevenness here. Well, if everything is out of the way. But basically these pleats won't really fully line up like they used to. They're going to be, their directions are going to change slightly. So right here, see how it's no longer lining up. Something like this. So I know that might have been a little bit confusing, a little bit crazy, but again, in this case, like precision and accuracy don't matter too much. We're more just doing some organic shaping. And now we've eliminated that pleat from the edge here. And then it restarts here and it comes across like normal. And we have some weirdness going on up here now, which is fine. Just like that. So while this is fresh in your memory, why don't you go ahead and do the other wing the same way. I'll show it again just so you can see that process. Basically, we're going to go valley, mountain, valley, mountain. And that's going to be our new starting point for this pleat. So I'm going to open up the paper like this. And then refold these pleats without that one running through it. There we go. And then now we're going to like adjust this pleat so that it can kind of follow suit. This. Just through a few of these. And then we're going to reclose the mountain valleys, which won't lie flat at first. There you go, like that. Now we have this like bulging area here, which we're going to then pull on this edge to start to straighten it. And we have to adjust some of these wing pleats to make that work. Like that. And that's going to leave you with basically some edges that don't really line up on this side, which is totally fine because we're going to use them later for our wing. So something like that. Now, they might not be the exact same on both sides, but if you can generally get that idea, then that's what we're going to work with. All right, so now we are going to work back on this wing, and we're going to be shifting the pleats so that they kind of fan out like the feathers you see here. And so, yeah, let's start on the edge. And because we want these pleats to be facing into the wing, like you see right here, this outermost one, I'm actually just going to do a valley fold. And I'm not going to valley fold it fully open. I'm just going from like the corner-ish here up till like the top corner over here. Kind of like this. Just to start to open it. And pretty much a lot of these folds are going to run from a corner up to somewhere in this area. But they're going to be very slight. So we have that. Next one is on this mountain fold, right? We're going to use that as our reference. This fold is going to stay the same, but the valley fold underneath, we're going to shift it. And the way we shift it is we just shift it like a little bit open. Like that. So this doesn't go to the corner. We want to go maybe halfway. So there's another crease right here. So maybe we fold up to here. This might change depending on how wide you want your wings. But you can see how we're just starting to fan out these layers slightly. So same thing with the next one, right? Like that. So do you see how we're kind of creating that? And then keep going. Now you'll notice now that we've gone through a few, the second layer of feathers are going to start to appear. It's not really going to change anything, but those just come along with it. Just like this. And you're just going to keep going until you've done all the layers. And we're going to see how wide our wings are. We may need to increase, we may need to decrease. Probably increase them though. Make it maybe a little bit wider. But this is kind of to taste. We just have a few more of these layers left. I'm kind of just running my thumb underneath the valley fold to get this to fan out. It's a little bit easier to manage like this. Just a few more. And here we go. This should be our last one here. And you'll notice that maybe the top isn't going to lie flat, and that's because we made a bunch of new creases. But what I want you to do is try to hold it so that all your feathers are fanned out. And then you can kind of just squish down on the top and see where it wants to fold. And it should kind of fix itself. It's going to basically create a new fold that's kind of slanted off the grid. If you want it to be cleaner, you can adjust it later. But this is just to kind of set all these feathers or these pleats into a spot where they can just stay on their own. So that way you can just reinforce all these creases as you go along. Now, if you're working on a large paper like I am, or even larger, you can use like a clip or something to just gently hold things in place as you're working and till it stays. So I'm just going to clamp this for now. Let this open just a little bit more and then work on the top to get it flat like that. Then we clamp this down for now just to reinforce it so I can show you what we got. So something like this. And if we hold it in reference to our phoenix, we can just kind of see if this wing is big enough for what we want. And I think it is big enough. It's a decent shape. So yeah, something like this. All right, so now if we continue, we've flattened out these pleats. We flattened this top part out. But one more spot that's going to need to be resolved is this hinge right here. And you can already see the creases kind of naturally forming. But on the bottom as well, it's probably going to need some sort of swivel down here to compensate. So this is like a swivel and a little bit of a squash, just to compensate for the change in all these pleats. So you can just do something simple like this to resolve it, just so that I can kind of lie flat without putting too much pressure on the paper. And that way we can kind of have that flat wing laying down on our surface like this. Cool. So I'm going to leave that pleat, or sorry, not that pleat. I'm going to leave this clamp here for now. It's actually kind of nice to keep the shape. And we're going to be using this one as reference a lot. So let me show you the tips of the wings, because that's what we're working on next. And again, this is kind of to taste. There's no exact reference, but you can see that these feathers kind of start to angle off where this grid line is. So if that works for you, if there's a grid line on your wing that you want to go to, which is maybe 2 grid units up, that's what you can do. But if you want just a different variety of feathers, you can do whatever you'd like. But essentially, a lot of these feathers are just formed by doing swivel folds. And they're kind of like reverse folds, but just not at the same angle. And then they're also swiveled on the back too. And so I'll show you what I mean. So first thing first, we can take the very end feather. And yeah, let's use that grid as reference just for now, a little bit. So 2 grid units up is where we can start a fold. And I'm just going to make a mountain fold to tuck this one behind. Now to reference, again, I'm using this grid point. And then I actually don't really want to go to this reference line. I want to leave some space because these feathers aren't like super pointy per se. They don't actually look as good if they're super pointy if you look at a feather. So I'm just intentionally leaving like a little gap. So that's the start of one feather. Now the next feather, I'm going to show it as a pre-crease. I don't really normally pre-crease these, but it's just to hopefully show what I'm doing more. Again, I'm going to use this 2 grid as reference, and I'm just going to make a valley fold to approximately where I want the feather to go. And you'll notice that, see, on the next one, it won't let me actually fold all the way through. And that's totally fine. I'm just doing a very small pre-crease. See that line? And then now I'm going to do a reverse fold along that crease. But once again, that reverse fold isn't going to let me go all the way. But I want to push it as far as I can. So we have our first crease here, and the second crease will go to this corner right here. And that's like as far as it can go. When I fold it flat, you'll see that, see how this reverse fold, it's not going all the way through. It was slanted, just like that. And that's going to start basically the next feather. I'm going to push this in a little bit more. And it gives us this shape right over here. So I'm going to do one more level, actually. So let's do the same thing. I'm not going to pre-crease it. No, well, okay, yeah, no, I'm not going to pre-crease it. Basically, I'm going to use just this reference here. And the next reference is, see where a grid line is? Remember, we don't go all the way. We leave a little gap. It's hard to see. It's like right here. And then the reverse fold won't go all the way through. It'll just go until wherever it hits this corner. Like that. And depending how your pleats are, right, it might end up looking a little different. Something like that. But now from here, I want to thin this into a shape that looks kind of like this. Now, how would I do that? And this is where we're going to have to swivel from the other side to do that. So it's hard to show. Maybe I'll show it done on both sides. I'm going to imagine the same angle here, but on this flap right here. So you can see how I can kind of start to get that mountain fold in like that. But then to allow it to lay flat, I'm actually going to have to look at the other side and do a swivel fold like this. Like that. So that way you can see how it's thinned out that next flap right there. And I can probably go even steeper. It just kind of depends what shape you want your feather to be. Now, if I go steeper, I might get some overlap over there, which you can probably just swivel out again. But you don't really have to. It's kind of okay to leave. Like that's just a very small bit of paper sticking out there. It's kind of okay. And then actually with that, you can see if you need to adjust this anymore. And since this is now a little bit too thick of a feather, I'm going to adjust it until it's more so the shape that I want, like this, to match the next one on top. Right. And you're going to repeat that process for all of these pleats. So again, from here, the next thing I can do is that swivel from the backside to start to thin this feather. Right. So something like this. Do a swivel. To about what I think should be correct. Check it on this side. Something like this. Yep. Maybe make it a little bit cleaner. And then from here, we're going to do on the next feather another reverse fold. to line it up. Like that. And now the next pleat is like a lot closer to the other one. It starts right there. So yeah, it's gonna look a little bit different for each one as you go. Or if you need to adjust it, like I can adjust this pleat back here and then make it a little bit steeper. But yeah, this is kind of just a slightly tedious process, but it's worth it to get the correct, you know, orientation of the feathers that you like. So I might be showing it a little bit fast just because it's for the tutorial, but I recommend you to actually spend some time to get these to look how you want them to look. So, you know, something like this. That, and then once again another swivel on the other side. Like that. I kind of made it a little bit messy. And I keep going. Now this next thing is going to be another reverse fold. Like this. And then now this one is like really behind. So I can really adjust what that feather is going to look like. But go ahead and continue this process through all the feathers until you get something that looks kind of like this bottom row. So yeah, we'll be right back. Just keep doing this process all the way down. All right, so I finished up the wings, and because I kind of left you all hanging, maybe I'll explain a little bit. I'm actually going to put this clip on this joint now, just because it'll make it a little easier to show. All right, so, you know, we did basically the whole thing. Same old, same old. It got a little bit different here once the pleats got a little bit wider, but majority the same. And then this last one right here, I just did another mountain fold to get it across. But you can kind of see the shape and how it followed this grid line all the way across. And I'll show the back. And the back is the main difference between each one is the swivels change from being like pretty small to larger and then smaller again and then larger here, but this one wasn't even like to a corner, and then this one was. So each of them are like a little different. This one I did 2 swivels, and you're pretty much, you know, really just shaping each individual feather to kind of look the part, right? They're not really the same, but you kind of want to make it uniform so that the spacing is kind of the same and the overall shape is kind of the same. And that gives the effect of the feather. Now, one thing to note, mine isn't really completely flat anymore. It's starting to curve up this way, which is actually a good thing because I think we want our wing to curve anyways. It's always nice. But yeah. All right, so now we are going to work on the internal layer of the feathers. Now, these ones are a little bit tricky sometimes. I'm going to see if I actually do it the same as on this one. Basically, what's going on is we're freeing the flap a little bit. If you've done scales before, it's kind of like pulling a layer like that. Or actually, it's similar to what we did on the chest feathers, except we don't have like a full flap of space to actually use. And then it's just like a couple swivel folds and optional sync folding if you want to do that. But let's start with maybe the outermost one, which would be let's see, right here. All right, so we can't really do this one because that's where it starts, but we can work on this. And what we're going to do is kind of pull it out like that, stretch the layer, recollapse, And on the bottom, just like valley fold part of it to the side for now, but not the actual pleats. We're going to valley fold. See how it can kind of hide itself underneath like this. And then fold back. Maybe it'll make more sense on the next one. I'll hold it this way. I think it'll be easier to see. And mine's a little bit sloppy right here. So maybe I'll clean this up slightly. Oh, now I tucked it in too much. Okay. So we're pulling out the layer like that, but see how there's all these mountain folds that make up this pleat? We want to retain all those mountain folds. We're just going to be pushing the pleat back into place, and it kind of valley folds down underneath like this. And yeah, so this is actually very similar to what the torso feathers are like, but because it's angled, you get like a little bit of stuff sticking out here, which I think I'm just going to leave it like this for now, and we're going to resolve it later when we start shaping more of the feathers. But go ahead and do this on all the pleats. I might show it just to show you the differences in all of them, because as you go down, it's going to be slightly different between each one. Like that. And once you get more towards like the full pleats, it might actually be easier just because things line up a little bit better. But we got this one. I think we got like 3 or 4 more. Right, so these ones are more on the grid. It's a little easier to see. Like this. If your paper gets stuck like mine just did, I just poked it from the back side and it was able to pop out. And this corner's still a little bit wonky, but I'll just leave it for now. I could probably poke it out from the back, but that's okay. We shall continue on with the tutorial regardless. Okay, so this one, I think this might be the last one we do. There is another one we could do, but I don't know if we're going to want to do that because I think it's might be locked in itself already, just because it's at the very edge. Oh no, I guess we can do one more. So I won't do this one, but I'll do this one right here. So pretty much till the end. And then right here, it's a little stuck. So I'm going to pop it open from the back. Close up that corner. All right. There we go. So now we have our next layer of feathers that are essentially open from each other. They might be overlapping a little bit in the back or between each layer. But what we can do is actually very similar to what we did down here where we're swiveling. The only problem is we can't exactly swivel here because it's in the middle, it's not on the edge. So when we do those swivels, we're going to have to like push in from both sides. So for example, like right here, what I'm going to start with is actually just a valley fold to start to get the shape of the feather. It's like this. Which maybe it's not even enough here. I think this one isn't really going to be seen. Maybe this is a bad one to show or to start. But right, I just valley fold it up a little bit. So that on the inside it looks a little bit angled. But then you can see on the bottom, we have this flap here that's kind of in the way. So we're going to have to just reverse fold that inside as well to allow it to kind of be its own flap. And then now I want to shape this flap a little bit, and I'm going to zoom like this, you can see it. So instead of this being like a straight edge, I'm going to do a very tiny valley fold. And on the bottom feathers, right, we went up 2 grid units. For this one, I'm going to use just 1 grid unit as the reference. It's going to be a little bit smaller. Now we don't like that valley fold because it's, in the way. So that's just a pre-crease. I'm going to mountain fold it behind. Now sometimes you might not exactly be able to mountain fold it because there's more paper going. So in this case, you could sink fold it a little bit. It's like a very tiny close sink. It doesn't have to be a pretty close sink, but just so that the paper can get out of the way. And then that's the start of the next layer of feathers. So yeah, it's a little bit weirder. Won't be as pretty, but you're going to keep going for the next one. So I'm going to show the next one, and they're actually pretty tightly packed right here. So it's actually going to be kind of weird to show, but hopefully I can show it enough. First thing we're going to do is take this layer and just kind of fold it down. So we have our feather started here, but then we have all this going on. And so we're going to want to reverse fold to get the shape of our feather. And my camera's not showing it the best, but like that, maybe a little bit more. And actually the shape of this one is kind of to my liking, so I'm not going to have to do that close sink. But if there's anything on yours that's sticking out, you might want to just like tuck it behind or fold it in place or out of the way. All right, next we have some more pleats that just kind of continue. So for one, I'm actually just going to move this one manually. So there's some more space between all these pleats. Make it a little bit more even like that. And then keep going. I'm going to valley fold this down. Like this. Then now on the top here, I'm going to do a little reverse fold to kind of get the feather shape. And while you're doing this, the other thing you have to try is not to undo the feathers over here. So just be careful while you're folding. But see how we're slowly getting these little feather shapes through here. And this one, I'm going to do the little close sink. But first I'm going to pre-crease from this side. So a little valley fold from 1 grid unit up to where I think it should go. And then I'm just going to do a little close sink by pushing it inside. Honestly, you can probably just mountain fold this one behind. Maybe that's what I'll do instead. Close sinks are a little tricky when the paper is soft like this. And again, I am kind of going fast because I'm showing this on a tutorial. So you can take as much time as you want to make these feathers look how you want them to look. But yeah, so I'll show one more and then I'll leave the rest to you, and then we're going to do it on the other side. So let me just finish this one off. Fold this down. And then valley fold this stuff inside. pre-grease this a little bit. And then I'm going to mount and fold this back around. There you go. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. And we'll have just a few more all the way to the end. And if I face it this way, right? So that gives that second layer of texture to the wings that you see on this guy. So yeah, go ahead and work on that all the way to the end. And then do both the bottom row and top row of feathers on the second wing, and we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit more about the shaping for the wings, and we'll keep going. All right, so we are back and we've completed both wings. You can see one wing, two wing, and they're mostly the same. Some things turn out a little bit differently just on how wide the pleats were and just kind of how I folded in general. But for the most part, we have the inner row of feathers, the outer row of feathers on both sides. So hopefully yours looks something like this. And if you did something else, just try to make it look good. And that's the most important thing. One key thing that I think makes these stand out is just that there is kind of some depth in the feathers. So the fact that they're kind of, sitting on top and creating some shadow is really going to help. Now, one thing you can do is if your wings on the backside are kind of flimsy or weak, or these swivels don't really want to stay, you can wet fold these to keep them in place, and that'll really help. So I think later we're actually going to do that, and I'm going to do that in the step where I'm actually shaping the wings. But if it's really bad, you can do that now and just let it dry so you don't have to worry about it. Or if you want to use glue, you can do that and just glue some of these extra swivel folds down. Doesn't really change anything. It just kind of gets it out of the way, but that's up to you. So one more thing that we just have to do with the wings that I think would look good is to get rid of this section on top. You can even see on this one, the paper, there's like a little rip in the edge here. And so if we just fold that out, we won't really see that. This is just kind of unfortunate. This is actually where I combined some of the paper when I was making it. So it was kind of weak. So I could technically just rip this off and be fine, but it's fine. We'll just leave it there. And when I wet fold it, it'll hide it. But basically what we want to do is just see where the edge of this layer or kind of sits on top, and we're going to make a mountain fold using that edge as a reference. Now there are a lot of layers, so just be kind of careful as you do this. I'm kind of just getting the mountain fold started towards the thinner area, and that's going to help me for this thicker area. And it's just a mountain fold. But something you might notice is with this mountain fold, because of the thickness, it kind of curves naturally. Especially if you're doing this in the air like I am, that mountain fold kind of creates a curve. And that's just because of how the layers are bunched up. But that's actually going to be nice for how we're going to shape this wing later. This kind of becomes like a point where the wing is, a lot of the feathers are coming from. And we can use that curve as something aggressive. If I show you the other phoenix, you can kind of see what I mean. So you see in this area, it's really curved. And we're going to fold in this bend during the wet folding section. But you can really see how, everything kind of comes from this point. It's thinned out a little bit more and just rounded. So it's really like a point. That curve. So we'll do something here where we can hide a lot of, these extra layers that are coming through like this that we don't really want to see, and just kind of shape it into a point slowly. But Yeah, that's kind of the end goal. I actually think the other wing was a little bit cleaner when I was doing some of these. So we can go ahead and just do the mountain fold on this side as well. And you know, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you fold cleaner on the second side because you're more familiar with the moves, one could say. But yeah, so that's just kind of how it turned out. It's all good. If the rip wasn't there, I think it'd look way cleaner, but that's fine. There we go, something like that. You can see it's kind of starting to bend a little bit. And that's it for the wings. All right, we just have basically one more thing to do before we start wet folding. And that is going to be the face. So let's get that started and then we can start wet folding. All right, so for the face, you can see our grid units right here, right? And I think what I actually did is just folded on the grid units a pleat to separate the eyes and kind of get the beak. So what that kind of would look like is we have our mouth right here, right? So this is just mountain folded along that grid, both flaps, and then valley folded. And it's kind of thin, so it's not that much of a pleat, just enough like that. Right, and we're keeping in mind that this is our beak, so we really want to kind of be flexible to maybe make it a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, depending. But as we kind of thin out the head on how it will look, so if I hold the top part down just to kind of get the general shape, I can use my thumb underneath, kind of round it into the head shape that I can imagine. Right, so you can kind of see the similarity between this one and the other one. And you'll notice that to keep this in place, now we're going to have to fold in these corners. We're going to tuck them in. And so you can see it's kind of tucked in like that, where it's a little bit wider towards the head part and thinner where the beak is. So you can start it with just a mountain fold like this. But you kind of want it curved so that it's not like, you know, you're just folding a straight angle. You kind of get a little bit of this roundness on one side. And then once that's in place, I'm going to try to mimic it on the other side as much as possible. So again, it's kind of just, you're really eyeballing it from here, where this mountain fold should go. And the beak. And this mountain fold does kind of trap the lower flap of the beak down. And we don't want that, but now that it's in place, we can free the beak underneath. And this is going to be a little small, so hopefully I'll try to show you how this works. But I'm kind of just going to separate some of the flaps, free it a little bit, and then reclose that mountain fold. But you see now the flap is a little bit more free. And then same thing on the other side. Just adjusting it so I can be more free like this. And from here, you're just going to want to shape out the beak. How I did it is I put some really small mountain folds, like facing outwards, kind of in a diamond position, to kind of get the beak shape. I'll try to show this as best as I can. It's a really small detail. And I also did the same thing underneath to get that shape. So this is where you might want to use like tweezers or something. Or if you don't have tweezers, you can just use, you know, maybe a fork, but just any small edge you can use to kind of like, you know, fold against. But in this case, I recommend using tweezers. I think at this point, you know, it's kind of reasonable to have tweezers. But let me show you how I would kind of do that. Is right over here. Let's start with the top one. I'm just kind of holding it in place and then using my fingers to create like a small crease along where I'm holding the tweezers. It's a very light movement like this. And I'm going to try to match that on the other side. Just on the top layer. Once that's in place, I can kind of reinforce it just with my fingers. And then as we get the head more together, it will stand out a little bit more. Now, this is also something that's going to really rely on the wet folding to keep its shape, but you still want to kind of have these folds in while it's dry, just so the paper has some memory of what it, is supposed to look like later on. Just something kind of like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom of the beak, but it's going to be a lot smaller. Just kind of get the pinch in. Again, it's like a really small detail, and you'll probably have to work at it for a while to get it to how you'd want it. And then once we wet fold it, it will stay in place. Like right now, this whole area is like fighting me, so it's not the best. And then the eyes. So the eyes come from just lifting this pleat a little bit. So again, I can use tweezers. You can use your hands if you want, but you just kind of give a little bit of an opening like that on each side. To form the eyes. Right, so you can kind of see even just from a little bit of that, you get some shadow, and then you see the eyes from there for the face. Now, one thing I'm realizing now looking at the other one, I might have actually put the pleat higher for the eyes. So, we kind of went through that process already, but I'm actually going to raise that pleats a little bit more. The folds we did already kind of are fine, except for the eyes, the beak folds, but we're just adjusting the eyes. So I'm going to push it a little bit further. And yeah, so you can just kind of do it to what you think would look good. And I just put these folds back. And this is generally how shaping goes. You do something, you undo it, you do it again until it looks how you want it to. But that's kind of the fun part. And the nice thing about folding is you can undo things and adjust it and then fold it back. So yeah, definitely don't be using anything like glue yet until it's ready. MC is fine if you've MC'd it, because you can undo MC. There you go. So this looks a little bit better. And then now we can do those eye folds. Just kind of the same thing. Lifting the flap up a little bit. Get some eyes. And I'm probably going to come back to the eyes later once the it's wet folded, because it's very easy to accidentally just undo these by pressing on them. But that's the general concept. I think the last thing we can do on the head that doesn't really require any of the wet folding is these top feathers here, and we just want to thin them out a little bit. So if I look on this one, there's no hard folds here. It's just like a slight kind of curved mountain fold, or a non-committed rabbit ear to just thin those out a little bit. And so since there's actually quite a few layers in here, you can kind of do the same thing. And it should stay for the most part. but try to just fold in like a rabbit ear into this flap, just to kind of thin it out a little bit. To kind of get the shape of the head going. Something like this. Same thing on the other side. Just kind of try to get a rabbit fold in. Rabbit ear fold. Again, you don't have to actually rabbit ear it. You shouldn't. You don't want to actually fold through the whole thing. You're just getting the impression of it to thin out these a little bit. There you go. The beak. There you go. So we kind of have our head like mocked out. Obviously, there's too much going on to really see the full thing. But now we can kind of get to wet folding. All these other head feathers here, they're gonna push in behind these feathers on top here, so they're gonna line up like that and kind of fan out. So yeah, just kind of be aware of where all your flaps are for when we start wet folding, and it's gonna help it turn into something a lot nicer. Once again, I'll kind of show this one, and a lot of the placement should make more sense now on this Phoenix as you're working on your own. But yeah, so that's kind of everything mocked out. Let's get to wet folding so it's no longer this crazy mess. All right, so now it's time to wet fold. And again, I have my methyl cellulose that is pretty thick. So make sure your MC isn't too watery. Otherwise the paper might disintegrate on you, and that's not very good. And then I just have a regular paintbrush. You want it thin enough where it can kind of fit between, the smallest details that you're going to go to. If it's smaller, it's kind of okay. It just takes longer. If it's too big, then you might accidentally unfold or push some details away that you didn't want to. But yeah, let's get started. Now, I think the first thing we want to do is actually get the body correct. And so when you're doing the body, you want to make sure you don't accidentally get any on like the legs or on the face or on any of these feathers at the moment. We want to do that later. The one thing we want to do with the body first is to just thin it properly. So that's going to be getting these layers together with these layers. So all of that together like that. And then same thing with this portion is, remember how we wanted to thin it. That's why we folded all of these layers up together. So if we were to compress it kind of like this with where it's thin and curved, that's how we're going to want the body to be when it dries. And again, a lot of this process is us going to be applying the methyl cellulose, holding it in place and letting it dry. So yeah, that's just how this tutorial is going to work. It'll be a little bit choppy probably, because I'm basically going to tell you and show you like, all right, we're putting methyl cellulose here, clamp it until it's dry, and then hold it in a position that you want, which will be a little bit thin and curved probably. But we'll still try to take it step by step. Now, as we do that, actually wondering right now if we should do the tail first. I think we can do the tail next. This thick tail, it's going to take some time. But let's go ahead and just try at least this portion of the body. If we can get that nice and thin and held in place. Don't worry too much about the neck at the moment. We're going to do that separately, because once it's going to be kind of the torso of the bird, and then the neck is separate. Just leave yourself some room to fit in. So if you're using glue instead of methyl cellulose, don't glue anything up here yet. Just do over here. And if you're wet folding, it doesn't really matter, but try to just stick to this area. But yeah, let's get started. So essentially, it's just you take your MC, take your brush, and you apply the MC, right? Pretty standard. Just get it, you don't have to do like every layer because it will kind of soak through some layers. But if you notice there might be layers that are untouched, you want to kind of get in there. If you do every single layer, just do light coats. Again, you don't want it to disintegrate your paper, especially since, you know, there is still some water in it. It's wet folding. You want it to, you know, so you want to still be able to fold it. You don't want to destroy the paper. So I think that's doing pretty good. You can always apply more methyl cellulose. You can't take it away. So if there's areas that aren't fully methyl cellulose, you can just add more. It'll be pretty obvious where that is. Okay, but for now, right, I'm just gonna close this off like that. Notice I'm not getting any on the outside, it's just the inside layers for now. And then I recommend you to have like a paper towel nearby, because as you're wet folding, your hands will get a little bit wet, and you don't want to get other things wet. So what you can do is grab like a little paper towel, just quickly dry off your hands as you're working. Right, so that's like the first side. Now we're going to do the other side, and then we're going to hold it in place while it dries. And obviously I won't show it drying, it's going to take forever, but we'll skip ahead till the next section when it's dry. Now I use a hair dryer to help it dry faster. Some people use fans. If you're in a dry, you know, maybe you live near the desert, it might dry faster for you. Sometimes you just have to be patient. But if you hold it in place for, you know, maybe 10 minutes, watch a video or read a book or something like that, then it'll kind of start to set if it's not too wet. And then you can just leave it in place and let it dry fully before you keep working. And that's kind of how you can go about this. It's a little slow process, but it's worth it. Okay, so now both sides are wet. So we can start wet folding and holding that in place. And the layers should feel like they can compress a lot more now. So the main thing we want to do is at the tail. Right, we have these layers popped forward, and then the others going to the back. And then one thing you can do is, because I didn't apply any at the very bottom, you can use clips to hold just kind of it in place so it doesn't unfold. But remember, you only want to use clips on areas that aren't wet. If you use it on places that are wet, you might get left with marks that look really ugly, and you don't want that to happen. Right? So just be careful when you're using clips like this, that you'll be all good. And you can kind of see how that's working. And already, if I show it this way, the methyl cellulose is allowing it to kind of thin and stay in this position. Right, you can see the tail is getting a lot thinner. Like that. That's exactly what we want. And so what I would probably do from this point is just hold this in place. Like that until it's dry. Now I did get the top part a little bit wet, so maybe we can hold it here too. And it'll be okay. Now I didn't apply any MC on the top layer here. So again, when you use clips, if it is wet and it leaves a mark, you want it in places it doesn't show. So if you do want to use like a clip here, which this one's probably too big, but I can fit it underneath maybe here where it's not showing on the top layer, and then that would kind of be okay too. I don't think that's actually doing anything though. So I might not use that. I might just hold it and wait for it to dry a little bit. Now once it is dry, you can re-wet it in some areas. Like it's harder to get between the layers, but if you start to re-wet it, you can undo it. So if you need to, like, no worries. With methyl cellulose, it's pretty forgiving sometimes. But yeah, I'm gonna hold this and just let it dry a little bit like this, and we'll be right back. All right, so I've left this to dry, and it's not fully dry yet, but we got to continue with the tutorial. I recommend you wait for yours to fully dry. It'll just probably be easier, but it's kind of at a state where I can continue. I'm probably going to have to do some other things later, though, to compensate for it. But you can kind of see how the layers are now just forming to what we wet folded. Ideally, what you would want to do next is, now that that is super solid, is you can actually do the outer layers and kind of just wet fold those to, you know, match the shape of the body underneath. But yeah, again, you can do that in your own time. I'm probably going to do it actually when it's dry. The next thing I want to tackle is the tails. So first off, we have this really thick tail, which we did some of these, you know, little plate texture things on. And then right along this edge here, we actually wanted to thin it with a big mountain fold almost in half. But it kind of starts to fight you underneath right there. And it's kind of like a big rabbit ear that kind of swings out like that to the side a little bit. So what we're actually going to do is to wet fold it in place, just like this, to kind of split the tails into two. So you just kind of, you know, get to this stage of the tails and go from there. So I think the first thing we're going to tackle is actually just this thick one. So all these layers over here, first we're going to apply MC. So let's go ahead and do that. And especially on the inner layers. You don't really have to do too much on the outer layers, but all these inner layers, make sure you get lots of MC, run in all the way through. And that's going to help us out a lot. Now also just pay attention to which layers you don't want MC in, so you don't accidentally get those wet. Again, it's totally fine because it's just wet, but it just makes it annoying for later. All right, so I'm just going to check some of these layers that they have MC through them. Kind of feeling if they're getting a little bit wet so that we can shape it, and then kind of finding where the areas that need more are, just like right over here, a little bit over here. That part is looking good. And then since we're folding it in half, I'm going on the underside right here, because this is where we're folding that kind of rabbit ear thing. Just get a bunch over here, help it to stay in place. And I think that's enough for now. So we're going to be careful because it's pretty wet and it doesn't explode. Refold what we had previously. Squeeze down. Now, because I didn't really do anything on the top layers, I can actually hold this in place with clamps because it's dry. So we're going to do this. I don't want to hold it fully though, because it might leak through and get the top layers wet and then it would leave a mark. So I'm just doing this for now so I can position everything correctly. All right, so we have our body here. And we want that tail to just kind of be underneath like that. The other tail is kind of facing outwards like this. And then later on, we can probably, you know, make this curved but we just kind of want to get these into place first. And then now what I'm going to do to really make sure it stays here is I want to make sure the tension points, which is basically in this area, has enough MC that can hold itself there. And right now it kind of is because I got wet, but I'm going to add a little bit more just so that when it dries, it's really reinforced right there. You can see some areas where actually there's not as much MC. So we're going to add some more just within those little spots of the layers. Again, I'm not really worrying about every single layer just because I know it'll soak through. But that looks like it'd be good. And then now that it's wet, it's going to stay there. I can kind of probably ditch these clamps. Make sure it's lined up with the body. That's looking pretty good. Now we just need to do the other tail, which is below. I might as well do both at the same time so we don't have to, worry about that. And here, this one's a lot thinner, so I don't need to go through as many layers. But again, I'm just finding the tension points where this crimp just needs to hold. So I'm getting some MC in here. And then I'm also going to flip it over and put it in the layers on the other side. So these layers. These ones go a little bit deeper. Like that. And then get it into the position I want it in, which, see how I'm kind of doing them spread like this. If you don't want that, you can make them wider, thinner, however you'd like. I think this is gonna look nice though. It's kind of like what our other Phoenix has. Just like that. And once again, we're gonna just let it dry. So be patient, let it stick through, and let it dry. All right, so the areas that we methyl cellulosed are considerably more dry now, including the body and the tail. So you can kind of see from the back that it's frozen into place like this. That's what we want, and then if you don't like the position, you can always re-wet it and then change the paper's memory again, let it dry, all sorts of stuff. That's the process of wet folding. So if this is your first time doing it, hopefully you're getting used to the process because we're going to be repeating that quite a lot. The next thing we're going to do is, now that we've done this section, we're going to conform this area to basically what we have here. You can see it's already a little bit curved from what we folded before, but essentially we want to be folding these layers backwards this way at a curve. That way it'll follow what we have over here. So we're gonna do that on both sides while it's wet, and then we can squeeze them all together and hopefully it'll be all nice. So yeah, we'll do that first, and then we're gonna thin out the neck, and then we'll go from there. So let's get started. Let's just get some methyl cellulose down all in here. And there's a lot of layers in this section, so you can be pretty thorough. And it's going to look a lot nicer once it's, set. One thing to avoid when we're doing this is don't get too much on the legs, because we're going to position those afterwards. But everywhere else, totally fine. So that's that side. I'm going to do the other side here. And then I'm going to get some from the actual back side because there's some more exposed layers on that side. It might as well make it sturdy. So get all this MC into those layers. Just to get the paper wet, and then we can sculpt it into shape and let it dry. Alright, so that's that side, and then if I flip it over, so we can kind of see inside of here, right? All these layers, you can sneak some in. It's a little tight, but just a little bit at least to get some of these portions wet. It won't soak through. It'll help out. All right, so now that we've done that, let me flip it over again. We can squeeze paper together. And it should start to feel like it can compress more since it's wet. And then we want to let it curve a little bit. And now there's a lot of layers, but because it's a little bit wet, we can use our fingers to kind of curl it back. And that's how we want it to dry. Curl it back a little bit. Do the same thing on the other side. Kind of have to be a little careful with this. I'm using my fingers in the back a lot to keep it in place while I'm doing this. Just like that. And then once again, this is actually where we can use our clips because what we are, or what's wet won't really be shown. So it's okay if it leaves a little bit of a mark. You don't have to. You can, again, just hold it in place and let it dry on its own. I'm just going to use a clip just to show that this portion is safe to do it. And then you can kind of observe to see if like anything needs to be more rounded. For example, on this side from mine, it needs to be rounded a little bit more. And I can use the clip to help out with that. Just like that. There we go. So things are kind of shaping up, literally. And we'll let that dry and we'll be back. Right, so we're back again. Things are once again dry. And you can see that after I undo the clips, we have frozen the paper's memory to this position. The clips for holding it in place. So overall, our Phoenix is getting a lot more sturdy. Obviously, we still have things flying around, like the legs are all the way here in the back. But eventually, we're going to be able to move them forward as we push the body more into itself. And you can see that's more of what we want. Before we do that, though, let's go ahead and start thinning out the neck in addition with some of these head feathers. So we don't exactly need to position the head feathers yet, but more so the base of where they are. So I want you to make sure they're clumped together like this as we push them into the neck like that. So just keep that in mind. We're going to have to kind of do a lot all at once on both sides just to get this neck thinned out. And then we'll go ahead and shape more of the head. Let's do that next. So let's again grab our Methyl Cellulose. And this time we are applying the MC mostly to the base of these head feathers. This also is the area that comprises the neck. Let's get a lot of that in there. And then the other thing we want to do is actually to put some in this area. And I'm not going all the way down. I'm still leaving some of the body open so we can adjust that as need be. But kind of around the neck area over here. A little bit inside. Just to get that going. I'm also going to put some on the inside over here because there's a lot of layers. So this will just help us to compress these layers together. And then also on the other side, same thing. Just like that. Make sure you get it in the base of all these layers. There are indeed a lot of layers, so just be patient with it. Especially in this area where it's really thick. And then a little bit more in the neck. Right over here. Alright, so that should kind of be good for now. So I'm going to compress the base of these head feathers on both sides. Like that. And as I hold them, this should allow us to then push in the neck a little bit and hold that in place. And we can start to angle our head into the position we want. So make sure it's not like tilted off to the side at a weird angle or anything. Try to keep it nice and even to how we're going to want it to be shaped. Something kind of like this. And I'm just kind of now noticing how we have the even spread between the orange and yellow. I saw some people asking questions about this paper. I mentioned it in the first video. This is just how the paper was made. It's like a yellow gradient with orange. If yours is just single colored, that's totally fine. It doesn't have to have this. This is not a color change model by any means, but it kind of looks like it. But yeah, so go ahead, hold that in place. I think this is kind of what we're looking for. Let me show the other side just to check. So from the side, we have the feathers kind of shoved into the head like this. And then the neck pushing into that to get it thin. That way from the front, it's looking nice. And then later on, we'll deal with the rest of the feathers and spread them out and whatnot. But for now, this is looking pretty good. And yeah, just let that dry. All right, and we are back, and this has dried. So now it's pretty sturdy. And actually from here, if you wanted to, you could start to just work on the head a little bit. You know, solidify just the shape of the paper and the beak and the eyes and everything. But I think we're going to just wait for some of those details until everything else is put into place. So yeah, I guess the next thing we can do is start on the legs. I think what I want to do is just kind of position them first. So position them this way. That way we can then position the wings in the correct spot. And then we can do like some more shaping later. But yeah, I think primarily we can add some MC to like the top half of the leg and leave the bottom half for later. Because yeah, at least I kind of like to block everything out and then go into the finer details at the end. You just have to make sure that you left enough space to do that. You don't want to get it too wet early. Again, you could just re-wet it later, but I'm trying to just do it a little systematically so we don't have to keep undoing things, but nothing wrong with that. Just makes it a little faster to not have to do things twice, right? All right, so something like that into the leg. And then I'm also going to fill in some of the cracks that are left over here with MC as well, just so it can really get a nice strong bond that we want. And then from here, we're just going to place it over like that. And I can kind of pinch like this to keep it in place where I want it to go. And kind of get the angle of where it'll be. Something like this. And then from here, I think we should let it dry, and then we'll do the other leg. So I'm going to let it dry like this and then do the other leg, and we'll come back and work on the wings. All right, so we are back again, and the legs are set. They're not fully dry. What I realized is we should probably do the wings at the same time, and that will actually get them into place because they just kind of stand up like that. Now, one thing I want to do is obviously we're going to get this portion wet, have it held up over there, and kind of angle it like this. But I don't like this, how thick this part is. I think it should be curved and thin. So I'm going to basically, when it's wet, fold a mountain fold through this whole thing. And I can't really do that right now because it's thick, but it's going to make it more curved. It's not going to be like a really sharp crease, but I'm kind of just curving that to thin it out. And it'll be more like the stem of the wing, basically. In addition, I am going to add some MC into this joint to get it to stay. I'm going to avoid this section for now, just because I want to leave that open to wet fold later for some of the final shaping. Just because I think maybe I can think of something to make it look more aggressive, kind of like we talked about earlier. But yeah, let's go ahead and try that first. So once again, just apply MC, this time now into the wing. And the base of the wing is really important because we want this to be strong. Once again, with wet folding, you've heard me say this many times, but we're freezing the paper in time and or adding memory to the paper. And the memory, especially at some tension points, is what we want to focus on. And because you can see how gravity is dragging my wing down, currently that is one of the tension points. Right, we kind of have to fight gravity a little bit. Is the creases themselves aren't strong enough to support the paper. Hence why we're wet folding. But yeah, so that's kind of the concept. Get some here, and then on the other side as well. And I think if we get MC into this part in addition, it will be good enough. I know it's kind of hard to see because there's another wing blocking everything, but you know, I'm just putting MC into these joints that I talked about. And then on the underside, right at the base here. And then in the back, just a little bit of the leg. And then same thing over here for this joint. There we go. So now we can kind of let this soak in a little bit. You can just press these layers, get the folds to form back while it's wet, like this. Dry off my hands a little bit. And then push it into place like this. It's going to be like right there. But then once again, we want to thin this portion out. So now that it's wet, it's a little bit more malleable. So I can see how I'm just adding basically a small curved fold there on the bottom. And then I can do the same thing on the top. And I'm using my fingers on the other side of the paper to kind of help with the shape. So I'm not just squishing the paper, I'm being actually pretty careful here. In order to do this without breaking or adding too many creases where I don't want them to be. So that is looking better. It's still a little bit thicker than I'd like, but at least it's looking a bit better. I think I might need to add a little bit more MC for that to actually stay. I can tell some parts of it are still kind of dry. So I'm gonna add a little bit more MC, just in spots I think might need it, which is just the bottom there. And on more delicate shaping areas like this, you might have to just hold it in place with your hands while it dries for a bit, because it will just undo itself if you let go. But that's looking better. That's kind of thin. I like that. So I'm going to hold it like this and let it dry. And then you can do the same thing on the other wing, and we'll just keep continuing from there. So yeah, I'll see you back when the other wing is done the same. All right, so we have the wings done and set, for the most part at least. Now, you can see on this side, it's not quite as nice as the other side. So I'll probably go back later and do that. And then the other thing is the wings are kind of angled a bit too far forward. Later, we're probably going to have them hang back and then fold forward like that. But for the most part, they're kind of set in place, just held like at the right direction over here. And then we can do more shaping later. But yeah, for the sake of the tutorial, we're going to continue. But don't forget, you know, when you're working on yours, just make it as nice as you possibly can. But yeah, let's keep going. The next thing I want to do, I think, is on the head feathers. Now that everything is kind of set, we can actually do these without worrying about them too much. And basically what we're going to do is, remember when we were thinning these out, and then we were starting to give them a little bit of a curve. So we're basically just refolding that, but while it's wet, and that way when it dries, it'll hold that position. And then we're also going to be angling these at the proper area. So this one will probably be a little low, this one a little bit higher, and the top one even higher than that. But just kind of spanning them out so they look nice. Pretty simple stuff. To do this, you know, there's not really too much to explain, but I'll just show one for the sake of showing it. Right, you get some MC, just put it between the layers like this. And here, at least on the corner one, you really don't want too much because, right, it's gonna soak through and it'll be wet already. So you don't need too much. If you do too much, it might start to wrinkle or disintegrate on you, which would be pretty bad. Right, and then once you have it, and it gets a little bit set, you can just refold that shape. It's kind of hard to show now because the wing is in the way, but then you can curve it down as such. Now, because there's some layers sticking out over here, you can also take the time to clean it up a little bit. Since when it's wet, it is a little bit sticky. It might be easier to keep all the layers together. So yeah, go ahead and do that. And there should be 6 head feathers like this. So go ahead and do all 6 and then kind of just pose them so that you can see all of them. So yeah, I'm not really going to show the rest of them. I don't think I need to. And we'll come back when that's done. All right, so we are back and they're mostly dry. Hopefully they'll stay in place. As you can see, I am using a display stand to keep it upright while it's resting, because I don't want to lay it flat on its back anymore, since it will hit the head feathers. So if you just have something to prop up your model while you're working on it, I definitely recommend that. You know, nothing too fancy. It's just leaning basically on the tails and on the wings. But yeah, we can keep moving forward. It's also gotten to the point where it's so big that I've moved the camera up a little bit. So I know you see some like background stuff. It's not as pretty of a teaching space, but I hope you don't mind. But yeah, overall things are looking pretty good. Now that we've done, you know, most of the components, I think we can go on and shape the legs. And we're really getting close to the end, which is cool. Yeah, so let's go ahead and do the legs. So they're kind of already set like this, but we want to thin this part out quite a lot, in addition to make the claws sharp. So if I show how the original Phoenix looks, right, you can see that I've pretty much just thinned out this even more with another hinge, and then each claw is like very sharp. So for a very basic shaping, you can do something similar. I think that'd be okay. That's kind of what I'm going to show in the tutorial. If you want to do your own thing and just take the claws to the next level, you can feel free to do that as well. but that will kind of rely on your own personal expertise and, you know, how accustomed you are to shaping bird legs. I'm not a bird expert, so yeah, but feel free to try to make it look just as good as you can. Some things to note is, you know, to get the claws really thin, you need the paper layers to not spread out too much. And the way we do that is we actually are going to let the MC dry, and then we're going to shape it. So we're not going to shape it while it's wet. We're going to get the layers together, let it dry, then shape it, and then maybe reapply MC if we need to. But yeah, essentially what we're going to do is, even though this is partially methyl cellulose already, I'm actually going to like unfold this kind of, so we have access to some of the layers. And then we're going to add MC and get them all to really be together and each toe to be individual. We don't want the claws to be together, but we want the layers to be, you know, kind of attached. Not really attached, but, you know, together, stiff, so that we can shape them together and fold them without them creeping up on each other. Now the top portion is already methyl cellulose. If I get it wet, it will come apart. So it doesn't really matter if it does like that, because it's just going to re-dry. But now we're applying it, and we want a good amount in each of the claws because we want them to be super crisp. So at least try to get a little bit into each layer. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and redo it. So yeah, just gently get them between the layers like this and like that. And then on the underside as well. But before I do that, I'm just going to squeeze these layers into place so it can start setting on the top. I'm going to squeeze the claws together like this. But because we kind of folded it already, right, once it dries, it's still going to have that memory from what we did before. So it's not for waste or anything. It's just we're basically just going to put it back. It'll be a little bit easier to put back because that's the, you know, there's a good impression there of the previous creases, which is good. And from there, we're going to go underneath like this and get that wet as well. And let it dry. It's like this, a little bit more. All right. So pretty much just like that. You can probably see on mine, and as it's drying, you'll see layers that start to lift up where the MC isn't really getting paper wet. And in those areas, you just want to go over it with a little bit more MC. And squeeze, make sure it's nice and sharp. And that's how you're going to get sharp claws and thin legs. So yeah, go ahead and do this. And this works on any paper as long as you're not using foil. But yeah, just like that. On this one as well. And we're going to do the same thing on this leg. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll come back when it's dry and we'll start shaping it more. All right, so now the claws and the legs are hopefully dry enough. And we will continue. So what we can start with is just folding everything back to how it was. So for starters, we can just fold this whole thing in half, and it's going to feel a lot crispier. So you might have to use some more effort to fold this, but that's going to be a good thing. So that's kind of exactly what we want. You can see it's already kind of staying on its own, which is very nice. And then what we wanted to do is kind of where the thicker part of the leg ends, you want to add kind of that joint downwards, and then partially through the next one, we want to add another joint like this. And that way it's going to be looking like it's kind of stretched out. And you can kind of adjust this to however you think it should look. Right? So we can see from this one. And this might take a lot of work to kind of get it right to exactly how you want it to look. But just something kind of aggressive, I think, will be fine. So I actually want that part to not be so thin. I'm going to use my tweezers to pop this portion out a little bit while I'm folding. There we go. And that way, the claws will then be around here. Now, we folded this part in half, but we also want to fold it in half again. And that will really get it thin like that. But just on this section now. So this is going to be a little bit hard to do just because the paper is everywhere, but very carefully try to thin that out as well. Actually, because we let it dry, it's a little bit easier to start it and get it into shape and then to press down and get it to like crimp into position. You can see how that works. It makes it a lot thinner, for sure. And lastly, it's going to be just like a little bit of final touches on the leg over here, which we have these layers, but I'm going to kind of pinch them into the inside a little bit. It's my tweezers to start it, and then my hand, just kind of mount and fold it in so that it can kind of sit like this when it's done. And then you might have guessed, right now it's not staying exactly how I want it to, but in order to get it to stay exactly how I want it to, I can just re-wet it with MC and get it to stay there. Now we have the claws to deal with. So remember how we organized them to kind of be spread out. So we can take this bottom one, get it down here, and then the rest can fan out a little bit and fold in half. And hopefully get them pretty sharp looking because of our methyl cellulose. Now, if there are some that aren't as sharp and the layers are still poking out, then you'll want to one by one apply methyl cellulose, fold them into place, nice and thin, let it dry. And basically just spend time shaping it until it looks nice and sharp. Right, so I'm just kind of fanning these out back to how they were. And then remember we folded these up a little bit just to kind of lock it into place. And you can see now, right, it's like kind of sprawled out like that, which is looking pretty good. This can be a little bit more in the center. And now from here, we want to actually just turn these into claws. So easy way to do that is just to add a joint towards the tip, making them clawed down. That's going to add a nice little extra bit to them. Now what I like to do is after I point it down, I kind of pinch near the joint. Like it's super small detail, but it just kind of enunciates the claw a little bit at that joint. So I don't know if you can tell right there, I pinched just a little bit and that kind of accentuates it. And I'll do that on the others as well. Just trying to make them around the same length. There's one. And here's another one. You just want it to look pretty sharp and fierce. And then same thing with the back one over here. Except it's going the other way, and this one I don't do it as sharp, or not as angled, so it looks like it's nice and open. And then it's also a little bit too much to the side, so what I'll do is I'll use some MC and have it placed right there, let it dry. But that's looking pretty good, I think. You can see from the side view how it looks. And then I think what I'll do from here is just keep tweaking it until it's in a really nice position that I think looks really fierce. I might actually, from the top, it looks a little bit too thick to me. So I might even thin out these a little bit by just using my tweezers carefully and folding these in half even more. It's kind of similar what we did to thin the leg. So we're just doing this to thin that part of the claw out, like that, on each one. And yeah, we're starting to get into the final shaping where we're adding a lot of fine details to seal the deal of the model, as one could say. So these aren't really steps. These are, how good is your eye for seeing what you want to do, and then can you use your hands to do what you want to do and finish it up. So yeah, I'll probably spend more time on this just to get it exactly how I want it to look, but that's kind of the concept of what you can do for these claws. And yeah, I'll just show, last thing is fitting this into place. So I only really need a little bit of MC right here, because this is the tension point of the back claw. And then once that's done, I can just hold that in place where I want it and let it dry like that. And that'll be it. All right, so go ahead and do the other claw, the other leg, and we'll come back when this is dry. All right, and we are back once again. We're getting closer and closer. So the claws are done. They're looking quite nice. A lot, better than just kind of floppy flaps. They're nice and sharp. We got the leg defined, so there's intention there. From the top view, it's looking decent too. The angle is what I want, and the legs are coming down at the correct spot. You got little joints. It could be better. You could spend some more time just to clean up a little bit more, but I think overall we're doing pretty okay. Next thing we're going to work on is the head. So this one's going to be a little tricky, just the nature of things. And so we got the beak down here. We got the upper beak with, some flaps that are lifted up, and then the feathers back here. Now, actually, the shape of this is looking pretty good to me. If yours is different, maybe it's compressed in a little bit. Just try to make it round, pop it out. If you need to wet fold it for that, you can go ahead and do that. But don't forget, the initial shaping was just that rabbit ear pinch. And then because we've solidified the neck, it's kind of opened up. You can kind of see how that works to our advantage. The main thing I'm worried about right now is actually the beak. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is get some MC and actually just very lightly put some underneath these top layers like this. And that way they won't be lifting up and getting all weird when we shape it. And doing it very lightly, if you get it too wet, it's going to wrinkle. So that's really something we want to avoid. So that's looking good. And then down at the bottom here, this bottom beak, it's a little bit shifted and some of the layers are coming out too. Just basically just one layer. So I'm going to add a little bit of MC down there too, just to keep it from lifting. Kind of the same process. And do that. The other side is kind of okay. I don't think I have to worry about that. So just very carefully applying that. And so some of these things are basically just final touches of what we're doing. And actually, speaking of final touches, while we're working on that, something I noticed, and we can let that dry, is on the back, right, is sometimes these flaps right here that are just mountain folded are kind of lifting up too. So if you want just to keep it clean, it doesn't really change anything aesthetically, but you can add some MC just to leave it down, keep it flat as well, right? Like so. And same thing on the other side. And it'll help, you know, make the back side look a little bit better. We're not worried too much about how the back looks. But if you want it to look nice, right, we do have quite a lot of patterns going on. So maybe you want to show it off too. I think it's kind of messy personally, but that's just the nature of things. And then now with these swivels, I mentioned before, you can do the same thing if you want. However, I kind of like leaving them loose because it gives more depth in the front when you have that shadow. It's just sometimes it gets really unruly or it's popping out at weird angles, but that's kind of up to you. So see other areas if you need to do some finishing touches. I think one other area could be up top here. If you want to keep this down a little bit sharper, you can do that. But yeah, just do a little bit of that and let that dry. That way we can finish up shaping on the face, and then we'll do some shaping on the wings and a little bit of curves on the tail, and we'll be good to go. So yeah, see you soon. All right, so we've let some of the things dry. The beak is still a little bit wet, but I'm gonna try to show you how to shape it a little bit. Essentially, all we really need is for the bottom beak to kind of be down a little bit, and the top beak just to give some shape. Now, my bottom beak is a little bit uneven, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we're just going to have to shape and compensate as much as possible. And part of that is with this side thing that's tucked underneath. We can kind of just push it down for now, so we can shape the top of the beak. And if you remember, in the top of the beak, we had some folds going this way and that way. They've kind of disappeared since we wet folded it a little bit, but like maybe your paper has a little bit of the creases. So I'm just going to kind of place it back using my tweezers to kind of show where it was. Right around there and there. And what we want is just kind of a small texture. It's not even like a full fold. It's just a little bit of almost like a pinch on each side to kind of raise the beak up a little bit. And that way people can see it. Something like this. And this is pretty delicate because it's a thin layer and it's still a little bit wet. So you definitely want to do this when it's mostly dry. And kind of keep it even on both sides. Like that. There we go. So we get a little bit more definition in the beak area. You can see on the other phoenix, right? It's very subtle on the other phoenix, but it's there just a little bit, right? And then now for the bottom of the beak, this kind of just is, you shape it according to how the top beak is. So I'm going to actually try to pinch it in half just to make it symmetrical on both sides, which it's not doing for me. So I'm going to put it over here, kind of shimmy it into place. There we go. And then open it up just a little bit with my finger it's kind of hard to see what's going on. But basically, I'm just moving it in line together like this, right? Just by pinching it into place. And once it's pinched into place, I'm gonna pinch the tip a little bit to make it not so pointy. That way you can kind of see the bottom beak, right? Very delicate. And that way, when you look at it from the side, right, you can see the beak pointing out like this, right? So very fine details with this. And then now that it's set here, I'm actually going to take just a little bit of MC and put it in the very back and base of where these folds are. That way it can just dry and kind of have a new memory. Be a little bit more sturdy so it doesn't quite get undone. And with that, we're just going to let it dry very gently so that we can then do the eyes, which I kind of showed how to do dry, but we need to just put them back. And that would be the last detail for the head. Maybe a small thing to clean up the head a little bit would be to hide this gap right here. Maybe push it a little bit closer, so we can add some MC there and just close it just a little bit like that, which I can do now since it's drying. So just get a little bit of MC and try to get it in this gap and underneath a little bit, right? And just very gently push this together, which actually it's probably just going to get undone when we do the eyes. But yeah, we can think about some small details like this, just a little bit like that while it dries. And then meanwhile, while this is drying, I think we can go ahead and shape the rest of the tail, which it's pretty much done. But I don't like how it looks just pointing straight down. It's kind of lifeless. If you look at the other Phoenix, I gave it just a small little curve. And originally it didn't have this, but then I added it, and I think it looks a lot better with the curve. Like it's just a slight or a small change, but it's a big difference. Now I think the tail's too small on this version of the Phoenix, but we have a nice long set of tails on this one. So curving it is going to be even nicer, and it really just has to be like the bottom, almost the bottom half that needs to be curved. But it's pretty simple. We just want to get this portion wet, let it curve a little bit, let it dry, and do the same thing on the other side. Now the tails, right, they're different thicknesses. So this one's a lot thicker than this one. Let's start with the thin one. You can just go on the inside layer here. This is primarily where it can reach all the layers. All right, so we really want the center of the structure to be wet so that it can hold the curve without wrinkling a whole bunch. I highly recommend you avoid getting MC on the top layer. Again, if it gets too wet, we get wrinkles. But you can kind of look for different layers in the tail that we can use. So maybe down in here, and then in here, and then in here. That, and maybe a little bit over here, but not too much on the top. Get this all together. And for now, we can just kind of press in the MC so that the paper starts to get wet, and you can kind of soak it in. You don't really have to curve it yet. You can curve it when it's just starting to dry. Right, so like this. Which means we can go ahead and work on the other tail, get some MC in there. And then we can curve the first one, and then it'll be time to curve the second one. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna add some MC in here. We've had quite a bit of MC previously, so you might have to get it a little wet and it'll open the paper back up. Again, as long as you get like enough in the center part, then the curve will be all fine. And there's plenty of layers here that should be good to go. And honestly, if there's no more layers, it's all really tight and you can't get the insides wet, you can probably just curve it as is. That means it's probably crispy enough for you to just curve dry, which is totally fine too. But there we go. I can't get into too many layers here, but I think this is going to be enough anyways. Let's flip it over back to here. Push these in. Get these pleats nice. Showing off these layers. There we go, and I can start to feel it be a little bit damp, which is good. And now we can return back to that first tail we were working on. Give it a little curve down here. And this is definitely, you're just going to have to eyeball this. But you kind of want it smooth so that you want to be able to see like the tail like this a little bit as it's coming down from the front, but still want it at an angle, so it's not like straight down. And that way from the side especially, you'll get that nice like curve. And then same thing on the other one. And honestly, sometimes what you can do, depending on your setup, is if you can prop your model on something that's like low enough where the tails can kind of curve on their own. You can kind of use the floor to like hold them in place. This is a little risky because it might make it uneven, but potential you could do. I don't think mine is quite set up for that, so I'm going to be a little bit more careful and just really get this curve worked in so I can dry like that. And I'm giving it kind of a curve this way and then outwards, so like this. And that'll give it some dimension in two planes. Same thing on the other side. And yeah, just work it in as it's drying. This might be something you have to check up on as it dries, because it might try to return to its old memory, and you just gotta work at it a little bit until it kind of obeys you. And that's looking pretty good, I think. So it looks like from the back, and you can't really see it, but on the side you can see it. It's looking pretty good. And yeah, I'm just gonna let that dry. And we'll come back when we're working on the eyes, and then we'll finish up the wings, and we'll be done. All right, let's set this guy up safely, hopefully. Let him dry. All right, we are back, and things are a little bit more dry, a little curve. I might curve this a little bit more later, but it's not looking too shabby so far. Yeah, we're almost there. And a lot of the face is kind of dry. So the next thing I'm going to do is just work on the eyes. Let's have our other Phoenix here for reference. The eyes are kind of just made with the shadow. So I kind of just have to lift the paper a little bit, give a little indent, and that should be sufficient. Now, it is dry, but we do want to be careful. It is pretty delicate. So just kind of I guess the harder part is grabbing, or where to grab, where to apply pressure on the paper. But if you have some tweezers or like a little anything that can kind of fit into this pocket and you can use to press your finger against, that's kind of all you really need. Tweezers will definitely help for this kind of portion. But you want to do this and make sure you don't rip the paper. So I'm being pretty gentle. And I kind of want to make this Phoenix look a little aggressive. So If I just do the eyes like this, it kind of looks weird, right? Kind of looks like it's not so serious. So it's a lot of adjusting. I think in this case, I need to make them a little bit closer, and I give a bit more angle to the eye. It's like this, and this. And we're just delicately kind of shaping the eye until I think it looks good enough. It's still looking a little bit weird now. It's like too large on the top side and too small the inside, so it looks tired. I'm gonna crimp it up a little bit more this way. So that's one eye. Let's try to get the second eye like that. Something like this. Still not quite where I want it. I think we're gonna have to do some more shaping even on the nose a little bit. So I'm gonna indent here just so I can get a bigger pocket for the eye. That way when I fold this, it's a bit more dramatic like that. And then same thing on the other side. So basically on the beak here, gently pushing just a little bit more of that in. And that way I can create more of a pocket to shape the eye with. And just delicately shaping until we get it. All right, we're getting closer. I think the left eye is big enough. The right eye is a little too small. See, on yours, it's okay if it's taking a while. All right, that's looking closer to what we want. I still might tweak this a bit more later, but I think we're just going to settle for that for the tutorial. And if I decide to shape it later, we'll see that at the very end, and I'll explain what I did. But yeah, so work on the eyes until you get it to how you like. Potentially, you can even just use this area as a flap and make an eye that way. But you know, something that's kind of subtle. Doesn't have to be too crazy or anything. Just get it kind of in the right position. I feel like my eyes are maybe a little bit too low. Not super sure, but maybe it's too low in comparison to the beak. Just kind of gauge it, use your intuition, try to make it look good. If it looks a little off, then that's kind of a cue that you might need to fix something. So for me, I'm definitely thinking it's a little off, but you can fiddle around with this until you get it to look correct. But at least for the tutorial, we're just going to move on to the wings so we can kind of wrap up this, this whole shaping process. So yeah, let's think about the wings and see what we need to do. All right, so in order to finish up the wings, I think we can take a look at this phoenix because I like the kind of balance of where everything is going. You can see the wings. If I move this guy out of the way, if you look at it from the side, the wings are actually pulled backwards a little bit, so it's very open. So when you look at it, it's like, you know, he's catching the air backwards. Very grand. But at the same time that it's going backwards and up, the top parts are kind of curling in, and that allows like a nice curve on the far side of the wing like this. So we're going to try to mimic that on our phoenix because I think it looks pretty nice. The only real fold is like this small valley that goes across here, which will be possible when we wet fold on that corner. Other than that, it's just on this hinge that pulls the wing backwards and open that we're going to have to do on this guy. Right here, we actually have more space than the other one because our wings actually are hinged outwards, which I think looks better. And essentially, we want to get it wet. We don't want to like pull that open. We want to twist this backwards a little bit like that, and then have it come down like this and wrap through. So I guess before we wet fold, we can kind of spot where this fold is going to be, this valley fold, which is going to be just starting right here, which is actually a grid, kind of a grid line right there that we can use as reference. And that's going to make that nice. So let's get some MC along this area. I think that's going to help us out quite a bit. And then if you need to move the joints, but it's not moving, you might need to wet the wing on the back side. So let's get these layers first, and then I'll show you what I mean. All right, I think that's plenty over there. Now I'm going to carefully flip this backwards, and the tension point will be around here. So let's get some MC in the back over here. This will help us with that curve. And then this area, there's a lot of thick layers, so we'll get some MC on it to loosen it up in order to wet fold it. All right. Here we are, and it's now a bit wet, so we can kind of squeeze the layers together like we've been doing. And at first, we're going to fold it open, and the way you can tell is you can just look at your phoenix and see what, makes the wing look open. And then once we get that, we're going to close up the top a little bit and try to get that curve. And we might actually want to add some MC just to the top part of this area so that the layers stay together. So see how these layers are starting to pick up a little bit? I'm just going to add to this top area. We don't want to lock it in the bottom, I don't think. It's just a little bit up here. this. So I'm really bending here, and then I'm allowing the rest of it to kind of curve like this. It's almost at like a slight angle like that. And actually, I think what might help is, I think I talked briefly about emceeing this thing. So I'm going to add some more underneath, and this can help hold those layers together and hold the curve once it dries. So I'll do that. Flip it back over like this and let that dry. All right, so that's the gist of it. And you do want to get kind of this to curve in. So feel free to add MC to get your wing to stay as you see fit. You can put some between some of the layers of the feathers. I wouldn't do all of them, but whatever ones might help, I think you should go for it. Get a nice wing shape. And I'll come back when this is dry, because I'm just going to have to hold this right here for a fair amount of time. And yeah, we'll see. All right, so we are done with the wings. So they're positioned, slight curve, all sorts of stuff like that. It's generally okay. And we are nearing the end. I think it's really, really close. So now the remainder is like final shaping stuff. Honestly, sometimes this part can take a long time, but let me talk through some things that I think can still be done with this Phoenix. Okay, so one thing just on the wings, something I actually did, which I didn't show, is on the back. So I put some MC in these layers so that it can be a little bit more rigid. The double tissue is really thin, so the wing was a little too floppy, but by putting it in the back, it makes it rigid, and it doesn't get rid of this shadow effect on the front side. So if you need to put MC, you can do it in the back. And the paper was billowing backwards too much, so it helped me kind of set it in the correct spot. Other things that I might do is get rid of little things like this. Like I can just mount and fold this behind to get rid of it. So try to hide some of these, ugly layers as much as possible, and MC can help with that. Right, but for the most part, we're looking all right. Another thing could be for the head. So the head still looks a little awkward. I'm definitely going to work on it before I take the final photos. But for example, like even small difference between how it looks like that and how it looks slightly thinner. I think there is still a fair amount of improvement just by thinning the head a little bit, because it gets the eyes in a more proper angle. And again, that's like a small thing with wet folding. You just get it a little bit wet, you hold it slightly thinner, let it dry, and I'll be good to go. So I'm going to do that as well. And then another thing is on the beak. I was actually looking at my other fold, and I didn't notice this until now. Let's put this guy down. Is the beak in the front gets thinned out. I think if you remember, I was saying it looks kind of strange still. It's because I was missing part of it. So if you look very closely at this Phoenix, if I can get it in frame and in focus, the shape of the beak starts to slim down right over here. And that's because there's some very tiny, which I don't know if this will pick up at all, but there's some very tiny curved folds from the tip to that point where I'm touching with my tweezers. Very, very tiny. And that gives the correct beak shape. It's a bit rounder than what we currently have on this one. So like very carefully, maybe I can show it here. So I'm going to take my tweezers and just make small little indents like this towards the point to get more of a beak shape. instead of leaving it kind of flat like it was before, which looked kind of awkward. That way it tapers to shape more like a beak. And actually, I might need to change this even more. Pushing this back a little bit more. You know, so something like that. So it kind of is more like an actual beak shape. And I'm probably going to go back and fiddle with that very carefully to get the right shape that I want. But a lot of small things like that to just finish off the phoenix is what you're going to want to do. I think maybe even here we can add some indents to just give the head some more shape. You know, just something like that. Something like this. And doing these small things and be able to notice what small things to improve on your model is really what's going to help you improve in shaping. It's going to make your model stand out a bit more. But yeah, so that's kind of it. I'm going to try to find a lot of things that I can do to improve my own fold. And we'll come back for the final little bit of this tutorial and see what it looks like. So yeah, go work on yours a little bit and we'll be right back. All right, and we are done with the phoenix. There are some small things that I've changed, primarily in the head, the eyes, but let me go over just some of the final things that I did. It probably doesn't look like much, but let's get into it. It's very subtle. So one thing I did is I did narrow the head down. So I described before that narrowing it down was okay. So I just had the wet fold under these layers a little bit. Another change to the head is I made the head feathers a little bit more at an angle backwards. When they're up too high, it looked kind of weird. More like almost like it would be a dragon, which is not. And so I looked at some bird skulls and it's more in line with this shape. And then if these were to be head feathers, they'd be more back, right? So that kind of helped me out. And then same thing with the eye, which honestly isn't super great, but at least from more angles, it looks okay. Basically, I was doing the eye in the wrong direction. I was shaping it originally more like this, but it actually needs to pull back a little bit more. So I just took a look at some pictures of eagles. Yeah, it's not super great, but I think it's better. It works a little bit more. Just like that. Slightly adjust the beak, just overall profile. But that's pretty much it for the head. In terms of the wings, on the back, I just solidified some of these squash folds just very carefully, or not squash folds, swivel folds, but only on the swivel fold so that on the other side, nothing's really affected. It just makes it a little bit cleaner from the back side. The back still doesn't look super, great. It's not really meant to be shown, but at least if you want to see the nice detail of the head feathers, then you can see that there, which I think are pretty cool. But yeah, overall, that's pretty much it. Just some small tweaking, small cleaning up of some folds, like freeing some of the layers here. So we get that nice under row of feathers. And yeah, I think overall this turned out pretty cool. So hopefully, you can take some of these tips, apply it to your own, get it to look how you would like it to look, and then go from there and get a cool picture. The one thing I wish I would do, which I'm not going to do for now just because I have to get this tutorial done, but maybe later, is you could do something more creative with the wings. So because it's a phoenix, I just want it in the default phoenix pose just for the tutorial and showing it off for now. But I think if it were actually coming down, then maybe the wings would be more further back and it'd be a more aggressive pose, kind of like on the first one. Well, actually, this was mostly because I had to, but I actually had the wings a lot more further back like this so that it could come down. It just doesn't really look good from the front angle anymore. But potentially what I can do is just get a photo of the front with the wings wide on this one, and then do something similar where it's in the back later, just because it's a small MC thing of just pulling it back. So yeah, we'll grab some photos and we'll see. I'll do a little bit of montage after this. You can see what it looks like in photos. But regardless, thank you everyone so much for following this tutorial. If you folded along, definitely tag me. I want to see your fold when you post it on like Instagram or Twitter or wherever you're posting it. Just let me know, because this was no easy task, right? But yeah, I hope you appreciated this tutorial, and thank you for enjoying this design. It's a lot of work, so if you want to just drop a comment, share the video, maybe drop a like, that would be really cool and would help me out. And regardless, yeah, keep folding, and I'll see you in the next video.
All this origami got me going kamikaze now.